Hello there fellow cake friends, and welcome to this week's tutorial. Today we are going to be making a simple monogram plaque which can be used for weddings, or you can customize it to use for birthdays or anything you'd like. You'll want to start with one batch of my royal icing recipe, which I'm going to link to in the description box below and somewhere in this video as well. In the description box you can also find all the tools, ingredients, everything I'm going to use for this entire video. If you are enjoying these cake videos, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. It helps out a lot. And without further delay, let's get to the tutorial. We will start by making a plaque. I find it easier to pipe on a horizontal surface, so I generally like to make a gum paste plaque that I can then add onto the cake. This one will be ivory, so the white piping stands out. I'm making it out of pure gum paste, and you can grab that recipe in the description box below. I colored this with a few dabs of caramel ivory coloring. Give it a thorough knead until it's nice and stretchy. Use a touch of shortening on your hands to prevent it from sticking and keep it soft. Press it into a rough circle and then roll it out. You'll want to print out the monogram that you'd like to make on a sheet of paper, then have something just larger than that to trace around to make the shape of your plaque. I'm going to run this gum paste through the pasta machine to a number 3 in order to make sure it's a nice and even width. Then I will cut around this deli container with a sharp X-Acto knife on this self-healing mat. This mat is amazing for cutting. I will link to it in the description box below. Then cut roughly around your monogram so you can see where it will be placed on your plaque. Next, we will trace the lettering on the back side of the paper with pencil, so you're left with a mirror image in pencil. If you need to see the lettering a little more clearly, you can just place this on a window and you'll be able to see pretty much right through the paper and trace it more easily, or just on a white sheet of paper like I'm doing here. And all you're doing is tracing the letters. I just printed off this monogram online, but you can use 2 calligraphy letters right next to each other, or really any other lettering you want. This is a really versatile technique to use on your cakes. And a lot of the times my clients will have a wedding monogram, which I can use, which is perfect. And once you've traced over the whole monogram once, go over it once more just to make sure the pencil markings are nice and dark. While the plaque is still pliable, I'm going to let it dry on a dummy cake that is the same size as the cake I plan on adding it to. Stick a couple of toothpicks into the sides of the dummy cake so it doesn't roll away. In this case, I'm using a 6-inch diameter cake that is 5 inches tall. Then you can place your plaque on and it can dry like this, and then I can attach the completed plaque with the monogram once it's all finished and I don't have to worry about messing anything up on my cake. Next, we will whip up a batch of royal icing. Grab that recipe and watch the video on how I make mine in the description box below. I'm actually just going to make a half batch for this monogram, but if you plan on piping more or you want to practice, feel free to go for a full batch. And we'll be whipping this to stiff peaks so it's light, fluffy, and holds its shape while you're piping. I'm going to use 3 piping tips for the lettering and a small star tip for the border. The largest I'm using is a PME 2.5, a 2, and then a 1.5. The star tip is PME number 5, and the 2.5 for some of the details. I'll link to all of those in the description box below. To fill your piping bag, flip over the top half, and you'll want to fill it no more than halfway full. I have a spatula with freshly whipped icing, and I'll just press that into the bottom half of the bag, holding it with my non-dominant hand and pressing with my dominant hand. Flip up the top half of the bag and squeeze the icing down, and then I'll show you my favorite way to secure it. So I take just enough that I can hold in my hand comfortably and push the rest upwards. Twist it so you have that palm-sized amount at the bottom of the bag, then twist it at the top, around the part with the excess icing. Secure it with a plain rubber band, and then you are ready to pipe. Once the plaque is dried enough so that you can add pressure on it without smushing it down too much, you can trace on it. You can also leave it to harden completely, and that will make your life a lot easier. Place your monogram centered on the plaque and trace over all of the letters. This will transfer a small amount of the pencil to the gum paste in order for you to trace over when you pipe. Comment below about what you struggle with most when piping on cakes. I know a lot of people really struggle with it at first, and it can be very intimidating, so I love to answer your questions. Start with a PME 2.5 tip. I've rotated the plaque so it's easier for me to see and pipe on. You should always feel comfortable when you're piping, so make sure your hands and chair all feel in a natural position. Then you can begin to pipe. You'll want to touch down at your starting point and keep your piping tip just hovering off of the plaque so you can guide the line to drop in the right spot, which is right over your light pencil lines. I'm really taking my time, being sure that the icing is sticking to the spot where I want it to go. When I'm finished that line, I'll press down at the end and stop pressure on the bag. I'll continue on to the next line doing the same thing, and any areas that need to be touched up, I can do that later. I'm piping the front part of the K now. Be sure to give your piping tip a quick wipe between each line so that when you start a new line, it's going to be very clean. If you haven't checked out my piping basics video yet, I highly recommend it if you're looking for some basic techniques to try out. Piping is really simple if you can break it down into simple techniques and shapes. I'll link to it in the description box below. These letters are very similar to the drop string technique that I show in the video. You can see here that there is a tiny air bubble in the M, which I'm going to fix with a damp paintbrush later. I'm just dipping that paintbrush in water and wiping off the excess on the back of my hand. I'm also cleaning up the intersection points, flattening all of them out so that when we add more piping lines on top, it all stays fairly flat. You can touch up any areas that you need, straightening out lines, fixing curves, etc. Now I will be moving on to my next lines, which are going to be using a PME number 2 tip. So all I'm doing is tracing right on top of the previous line that I just made, and I'm going to continue exactly as I did before. There's just going to be one slight difference. We're going to come to an intersection in just a moment, and I can show you what I'm going to do. So whenever I come to an area that will overlap, I'm just going to lift off and continue on the other side of the line, just like this. It will keep everything more flush and clean. So here's another intersection point. I already lifted off, and I will just stop the pressure and then continue on the other side of the line that's already there. I'm going to clean up the back half of this K, blending the intersection points together as best I can. And if there are any areas that the line isn't sitting right on top of the first line you did, you can just gently nudge it back into place with the paintbrush. Then I will continue with the second layer of lines on the front part of the K. And I will clean up those intersections as well, and then move on to the M. Make sure as you're piping these next layers, you're still using the same technique of allowing the icing to come out of the bag and then kind of letting it stretch out a tiny bit before you allow it to touch down onto the previous layer. The right side of the M wasn't quite straight, so I'm just nudging it back into place with my damp paintbrush. I'm cleaning up a few other lines as well as a small air bubble. Be fairly quick with this because as soon as the icing begins to dry, it'll be harder to smooth out these areas. And now we're on to the final layer. This one will be the most prominent, so make sure to keep it as clean as possible. So I'm using the PME 1.5 tip here. So with this layer, I am also going to be stopping at each intersection in order to keep everything flush, and then we will head back in with the paintbrush to clean up those intersections and blend them later. I stopped for a second here, which is totally fine. Just pick up again where you leave off and we can clean up any spots afterwards. I'm pushing this area back into place because I found it a little bit saggy looking. And if your brush starts to stick to the royal icing, just re-wet it with a touch of water. Hopefully you can see okay with this light. It was around 4 p.m. when I was filming this, and there is a crazy glare for like 5 minutes off the window right in front of my studio, so it'll be gone soon, I promise. Anyway, back to piping. I'm just finishing off these front lines of the K here. Pro tip, if you are cleaning up intersections, the easiest time to do that is when the royal icing is very fresh. But if you need to move lines to make sure they're in the right place, it's okay if you wait a few more moments, as this will help keep the line from sticking too much to your brush and losing its shape. Once you've completed your monogram, you can absolutely leave it just like this. And you could even stick it on your cake and do a little border around it then. But I am going to do a quick scroll border on this one just to finish it up and give it a really classic piped feel. So I'm going to mark the top, bottom, and 2 sides as evenly around as possible. And I'm going to start with my PME number 5 star tip. So I'm just beginning with a little fleur-de-lis on all of the markings that I made. So I'm starting with a shell shape, and be sure to check out my piping basics video where I do teach you all those basic shapes to know. Then I will make a curved shell shape on either side of the straight shell, making all the points converge at the base. And I am just freehanding the rest of this, making some scrolls and some C shapes, just a mix and match of some simple forms to create a really elegant border. And as soon as I make a shape on one side, I repeat it immediately on the other side, so it's as symmetrical as possible without having to go and measure everything out. And once I finish the border, I go over some of the lines with my 2.5 piping tip. Again, totally freehanding this, just having fun with it. You can add as many layers and use as many tips as you'd like. If you use sequential piping tips, just as I did for the lettering, you will have kind of a Lambeth style piping. And finally, I'm just cleaning up some of those lines that I've made. Feel free to touch up anything that you need, and then we are all finished. I hope you give this super versatile technique a try. It looks great in all white, or you can even layer different colors on top of one another to give it more depth and fun. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. You can also follow me on social media at Finespun Cakes with 2 S's everywhere, and find all the tools, ingredients, and everything else I used in this video in the description box below. Thank you, and I will see you next time.